welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what an honor to have with us today. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. Dr. Jerry Johnson with us today. He is the president and the CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters, and he is the warrior for all of us in Christian broadcasting. He's out there on the front line. In fact, he's moved the front line all the way to Scotland today. What are you doing over there? Good to see you, Jerry.
Well, very good to hear your voice. Thanks for being a part of NRB, National Religious Broadcasters. INRB is Intercollegiate NRB, and we just finished a 2-week Oxford Distinguished Scholars Term where some of our broadcasting students did one-on-one tutorials like they do at Oxford. They did it with an Oxford Don, and they worked on their skills, their academic skills, their media skills. And then next week, we're filming some interviews with Eric Metaxas and Walter Hooper and Michael Ward. So I'm taking a little vacation in between, and I'm in Edinburgh today.
Well, good for you. Thank you for your time, for being with us, and thank you for your service, by the way. I know you guys are on the front line, a lot going on. You made the comment before we went on the air, these are changing times fast. Did you ever think, Dr. Johnson, we would see in America what we see today, and especially with the Supreme Court making these decisions?
Well, I didn't think that, 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago, but about a year or two ago, I was saying that, what I see around the corner is just exactly this kind of government censorship, government pressure. It's coming, and the church has to wake up and get involved.
What is your first reaction? Because I know you're writing a 3-part series and a commentary on the Supreme Court decision, and you call it the Supreme Shame. What's your gut reaction to overturning the definition of marriage?
Well, that first piece, my primary concern as a Christian is theological or doctrinal or biblical. And the fact is, that marriage goes back to the beginning. We're not talking about even the law. We're talking about the first page, the first chapter of the Bible. And part of what it means to be created a human being in God's image is that he created us male and female. And so this notion of this manufactured idea of same-sex so-called marriage, it's a rejection of the Creator and the created order for human sexuality. That's actually Paul's argument in Romans chapter 1. He doesn't go back to the law in Leviticus and where it says it's an abomination. Paul goes back and says, this is turning away from the Creator, turning away from the created order for human sexuality. And so, I just know something that wrong can never be legally right. And that's actually what Martin Luther King Jr. said, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, that, unjust laws can never be morally right. So I think there's my initial reaction as a Christian is, this cannot stand. It will either bring the country down or we'll have a great renewal and a great revival and a great awakening, and it could be reversed.
All right, let's go down that road just for a moment. There is now rumblings that it may be challenged based upon the fact that 2 of the justices shouldn't have made an opinion, and there may be some pushback. It could come from a state level. From your intelligence, do you think that's a possibility?
Well, the third piece I'm working on here is about the shambles. It's actually, the Supreme Court has opened the door, Perry, for a lot of confusion. And so, look at Roe versus Wade. So this was a decision, back in the 70s, 1973. And I remember when Time magazine marked that, it said, the pro-abortion or the pro-choice side won in 1973. They've been losing ever since. That's what Time magazine said. That is, you've got parental notification, ultrasound, waiting periods and so forth, admitting privileges, pain-capable acts and so forth, partial birth abortion bans. So what this court has done is very similar. This is a broad, sweeping decision, sort of, just legalizing so-called same-sex marriage. And now what you're going to see, Perry, is state by state, court by court, institution by institution, wrangling and strife over this. And I'm not making any predictions. I don't know what's going to happen there. I just know that, it was the wrong thing, and, much harm is going to follow.
Well, we also know, Dr. Johnson, that Pandora's box now been opened. We see the case coming out of Idaho for polygamy, and any other aberration is coming at us. Are we prepared for this?
My top concern is obviously religious liberty, freedom of religion, or just to put it in layman's terms, the freedom to believe. What we're talking about is infringing the government, enforcing this view. They're impinging upon people's freedom to believe and to act on those beliefs, to obey the scriptures as they understand them. And so this comes close at home to you because, in the hearings, Justice Alito asked the president's attorney in the debate before the Supreme Court, what's going to happen if Christian institutions don't do or recognize or hire people, that are part of these ceremonies? Is it going to be an issue? The Solicitor General, Varela, said it's going to be an issue. It's certainly, he said, certainly going to be an issue. And what this means is ministries that have a 501c3 tax-exempt status, that's going to be at jeopardy now. I think broadcasters like you and many others who have some kind of FCC license, I just believe that's going to be at risk now. And then, of course, for our Christian colleges and universities that have accreditation through the Department of Higher Education, coming down to the Southern Association of College and Schools, the North Central. Accreditation is going to be linked to this federal policy. And I think we're going to see a huge infringement on religious liberty, the freedom to believe.
I think you're spot on. Tough question, but how did this happen under our watch?
Well, there are all sorts of political explanations. obviously, bad political appointments to the Supreme Court. These are presidential appointments. And so, in one sense, one or two justices would make all of the difference. And so you had certainly some Obama appointees and some Clinton appointees, but you also had some Bush appointees. And so, we need to insist upon, conservative politicians, particularly presidents, that will appoint strict constitutionalists to the bench. That's the first thing. But back of that, Perry, there is a spiritual decline that's reflected in this. And so we can't just blame the White House. We need to go to God's house. We need to go to the church and say, this is about the church in decline. This is about us losing our influence in the culture. This is about us failing in many ways to model marriage, to teach marriage. And so it's about the secularization of America. I heard Rick Warren say recently, America will either have a third great awakening or we'll go the way of Europe. And so I think we're partially to blame, and that's why it's our responsibility to make things right.
There's just been creeping deterioration, as you know, Dr. Johnson. In fact, during the NRB this past year, the internet bill came down and moved it over into a utility, which basically means now coming at us will be content control, which means any faith-based website could be taken down because it has content that would be offensive. Wasn't that really the unlocking of the door?
Yeah, that is the opening of Pandora's box because, I mentioned the IRS, the Department of Higher Education, or the FCC, but the internet has been this wonderful thing that's not had any kind of regulation or taxation. So by making the internet now more or less a utility by government classification, they're able to regulate it, to govern it, to tax it, to control it. And you're going to see the same kind of regulation you see with the FCC. I don't think this is a good thing. Already China censors censors internet content. Saudi Arabia censors internet content. You have these kind of repressive regimes that are doing it. And, I'm very concerned because last year, someone petitioned the FCC, to pull the license of any station that used the word Redskins on the air. And, the FCC has authority when it comes to profanity and nudity. But this was the elevation. This was the idea of now, there's certain terms, there's certain, there's hate speech, there are these speech codes. And I'm very concerned with this marriage ruling mixed with this internet regulation measure. I'm very concerned that you stir that pot up and all of a sudden, you're right, you're going to have censorship of the web. We've already got censorship on Facebook and Twitter and Google, and we've documented that at NRB. That's industry censorship. But now we're going to go to the level, I think, of government censorship. It's not a good place to be.
All right, let me take a break here, Dr. Johnson, and we'll come back. I want you to explain to us, from your perspective, where has this taken us Christian broadcasters? Because we're all sitting here going, wow. And as you know, the Spectrum deal is after some of us television guys. I mean, we're in a real spot here, and I'd like to hear your comment. We'll be right back with Dr. Jerry Johnson. We're Skyping him in from Scotland. And so we'll be right back with him in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, we're back, and again, what an honor for us to have with us today Dr. Jerry Johnson. He is the president and CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters, the NRB. We're Skyping him in from Scotland today. He's over there on some projects, and the warrior of what we do in Christian broadcasting, and he leads the charge, and what an honor it is to serve with him. But I tell you what, these are different days, and I want to hear from you, Dr. Johnson, just your overall thinking. Where is this going to go for us broadcasters? Because you had mentioned these decisions probably will affect 501(c) status, but it probably will first go to education, and it'll have a lot to do with whether or not transferability, grants, etc. It probably will interject into the internet, as we talked about, content control. Then I always thought, well, then they would come after our microphone and cameras before they go to the pulpit, but all of them seem to be on the target list. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would. I mean, I'm reminded that before the Nazis strung up Bonhoeffer with piano string, the first thing they did, he was speaking on the radio and they cut the microphone. They literally flipped a switch to turn him off as he was speaking, for the confessing church, the church that wouldn't go along, the church that was objecting. And so, I think we better get serious about this, defending free speech. That's the reason NRB came to exist in the 1940s. It was about censorship on the radio. And here we are again, back to the future. I think this is, for the next decade, it's going to be our agenda. But I am encouraged, Perry, that, two governors have done something that's very instructive. Governor Bobby Jindal down in Louisiana, Governor Sam Brownback in Kansas, they've issued executive orders saying that in their state, no state agency may discriminate against any faith-based or any individual or any business or any ministry or any school that holds to the one man, one woman marriage view. And so what that's done is immediately, given, more or less marching orders to all state regulators, state employees, that they can't force this on people down the line. What we're working on right now with Senator Lee of Utah is a federal type of a measure, and it's called the First Amendment Defense Act. It would essentially prohibit any federal agency from pulling a license, pulling accreditation, pulling tax-exempt status for those of us who have the view that the president said, actually, that he had, even for his reelection. He was still saying he believed that marriage was between one man and one woman. What we're saying is we hold that view. We should not be discriminated against. And I think we need to push for this bill. I really do.
He's going to sponsor. Does he have any other co-sponsors lining up,
He does. He does in the Senate. So what we need is folks just to, generate grassroots support. It's called the First Amendment Defense Act. And they should write their senator or congressman, call, email, whatever you do to get attention. But this is one worth, raising, because it would, even if it doesn't pass, it raises awareness. Even if the president vetoes it, it raises awareness. And I think that's very important. They need to know we're watching. They need to know we're pushing back. And it needs to get on the presidential agenda. We've got presidential elections in a year. And, I asked publicly Bobby Jindal a few weeks ago in a meeting, what would you do as president to protect our First Amendment freedoms? And Jindal answered immediately, on day one, I would sign an executive order prohibiting any discrimination, against Christian groups on this issue for licensing, for permits, and so on and so forth. So that was the right answer. I have no doubt some of the other candidates would do the same thing, but that's the answer we need to demand and that we need to seek.
Okay, but in the meantime, we have governors that may be taking the state pressure off. But the way it sits today, Dr. Johnson, the FCC could come after us licensees, right?
Well, and look, we've got to be real about this. We've watched this, Perry, in the last few years. The federal government has already had a new position on marriage. They've already had a new position in the administrative branch. So if you look at the military, we've gone from, no same-sex activity to don't ask, don't tell. And so now the full endorsement, of this view. Same thing with the State Department and the White House. So this is the official position of the federal government now. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled this way, it is not a leap. It is not a jump at all for the IRS to say, if you don't agree with this policy, if you don't function in accordance with this policy, you're not acting in the public interest. You can't be a 501c3. They did that with Bob Jones years ago because they had an interracial dating policy. You'll remember that. And they said, you're not acting in the public interest, and you're going to lose your tax-exempt status if you don't allow interracial dating. Well, that's another issue, and I want to get into it. But it shows in principle they've made that maneuver before. And I'm very concerned. We know that the FCC already has the tools in the toolbox when it comes to indecency, when it comes to profanity, and we need to be watching. And that's why NRB is in D.C. We are watching. We are raising our voice. We're applying the pressure.
All right. Is there a coalition, Dr. Johnson, between the NRB and the NAB? Because what is affecting the NRB certainly is going to affect the NAB. It seems now that these two organizations have to come into some form of a coalition to go after these rights.
Yeah, I have been meeting and talking some with Gordon Smith, and then our vice presidents with his. We're working together when we can, and on these kinds of issues, we're on the same track. And Gordon Smith reminded me of something recently, which I will remind you and our listeners, and that is the Supreme Court has already ruled in the past that the media can use the media to defend the media, and we still do have a microphone. We're doing this today. But until they literally flip the switch, I think it's very important for pastors to use their pulpits, for radio and television and bloggers and podcasters to talk about this issue. Because, when the New York Times had reporters that were put in jail because they wouldn't divulge sources, there was a case which said, could they actually talk about that in the Times? And they did. They actually, defended their position. But I think, in fact, we have to be willing to use this megaphone to defend the megaphone. I think that's very important.
What would you say to pastors and churches? Because one of the things we're having, and I've been trying to convey to our audience, because we hold these federally issued licenses, FCC license, broadcast licenses, and all the things that you just mentioned, a lot of pastors will look at all of this as nothing more than politics and thinks they ought to stay away from it. But what the culture has done very successfully is taken all the tenets of faith, politicized them in an attempt to keep us away from it. But we're in a whole new world today. What's your thoughts?
Well, preachers used to preach on issues. Somewhere along the way, Perry, issues became politics. And that was a subtle move that the mainstream media and the left used to more or less demonize, those with conservative views on the issues. But think about it. The abolitionists were driven by pulpiteers. That's true in England. Over here in the UK, where I am, you look at John Newton, you look at William Wilberforce. These were Christian men with Christian motivations that fought the slave trade. You can look at that in the United States as well. The abolitionists were Christian people using Christian arguments. You look at Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Movement. He used Christian arguments, theological arguments, if you read the letter from a Birmingham jail. And so I think, there's a great tradition of Christian ministers making Christian arguments about public policy. There's nothing wrong with that. That's normal. But somehow, they've put us on the defense. And I just think we have to reassert the offense here.
One last question, because I know you're on a tight schedule. Where is the balance in your mind, Dr. Johnson, between potentially civil disobedience on these issues and revival?
Yeah. Well, look, it's always right to talk about Jesus wherever you are. And I would remind your listeners, where you're working, where you go to school, it's always right to talk about Jesus. We know that from the book of Acts. Twice they were told not to do it, and they said, we will obey God rather than men. And so that's the first and most basic thing I would say. But secondly, we're blessed to be in America. We still have a First Amendment. We still have the Constitution. That's high ground. The Constitution begins with we the people. This still is a self-governing nation. That is what the Constitution says. These people are our representatives. We have instruments of impeachment. So I think, we are all part of the government. We need to be engaged. And, nobody trumps the Constitution, not even the Supreme Court.
Wow, well said. Well, thank you, my friend. I know you're on a tight schedule. And again, open invitation for salmon and steelhead fishing in the Pacific Northwest.
Let's do it, Perry.
When you get back home, let's hook up, okay?
All right. Thanks so much.
All right, God bless you, pal. All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Well, welcome back, and what a delight. I've been waiting for this conversation for quite some time. What an honor for us to have with us today Chris Mitchell. You probably see him on the Dove television network. He hosts the CBN program called Jerusalem Dateline. He is the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News. He's authored several books, Destination Jerusalem, ISIS Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. And we're Skyping him in today. In fact, I'll be honest with you folks. I'm not a selfie person. I don't take selfies. I took my first selfie with Chris at the NRB. So good to see you, Chris. How you doing?
It's good to see you, Perry. Great to see you now, or be with you since the NRB.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, listen, are you in Jerusalem now? Where are you? Or at CBN?
Well, I'm in the CBN studio here in Jerusalem.
Okay. Hey, great. Thank you for being with us. Well, the Iran nuclear deal, what's your take and how do you see it?
Well, I kind of agree with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that said it was a historic mistake. I think a lot of people over here think it's a catastrophic deal. It sets up Iran for a nuclear device, whether it's in probably several years. It seems like it's going to do that. It legitimizes Iran's right to enrich uranium, which gives them legitimacy that they hadn't had before. It allows them to have a number of centrifuges, over 6,000, to continue enriching uranium, even though at a smaller percentage. And I think, Perry, one of the main things I think it does, well, I'll mention two. First of all, it allows Iran to lift up the sanctions and have maybe more than $100 billion in their coffers. And what they can do, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, can fund their campaigns in Syria, propping up Syrian President Bashar Assad. They can rearm Hezbollah, Hamas. They can continue their proxy war with the Houthis in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. And it really pits up, in many ways, this Shiite, the Iranians, against the Sunni nations and Israel here in the Middle East.
I heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's response yesterday, short and very stern. You have any idea why we did this? It seems like we betrayed Israel again.
It's a great question, Perry. I'm not sure why we did this. I know a lot of people have speculated that President Obama wants a legacy. One thing it really does, and it's something that's a really profound shift here in the Middle East, it shifts American-U.S. policy towards Shiite Iran for the first time ever. I mean, the Iranian Republic was established in 1979, and it's been probably the #1 enemy of the United States since then. But what President Obama has done is shifted onto the Iranian side against traditional allies of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And what we see now happening, Perry, is actually a very unprecedented alliance between the Sunni nations, Saudi Arabia in particular, and Israel. And I think they're going to present a united front. They're sort of on the same page, opposing a Shiite Iran that wants to have hegemony in the Middle East. And now with the possibility of a nuclear device, it really sets up, I think, not a peaceful situation, but a potential warlike scenario.
So this could set up an interesting debate at the UN, if we find these strange coalitions, right?
Very strange coalitions. And one other point about the United Nations, Perry, is the fact that, the Congress right now has got 60 days to review this deal. And but what's happening, too, with the deal, it allows the United Nations to lift their sanctions, the EU, the European Union, to lift their sanctions. And even if the U.S. Congress votes against this deal and it sustains a presidential veto, which he's already promised, it looks like the horses have already left the barn in terms of the sanctions and the ability of Iran to reinvigorate their economy and fund all their sponsors of terror around the Middle East.
Does Israel feel betrayed?
I think they do. And I think all along for the last couple of years during these negotiations, I feel like they haven't had the ear, I guess, of the Obama administration. It seems like there was a lot of comments here in the last several months about the negotiations as they were going on. It was actually accusations that Israel was spying on the negotiations because they really weren't included and they weren't getting enough information from the United States negotiators. I think there is a sense of betrayal and a sense right now of a confrontation even greater than there has been in the last several years between the Obama administration and the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The Prime Minister yesterday in his speech, I think, made it pretty clear we'll go at it alone. I mean, in other words, he said this did not include us. We are not bound by this. We will defend ourselves. Is that correct?
I think it's very correct. And I think they've said that all along, that they wouldn't be bound by a bad deal. And I think they've said that all along that they retained all options, and that would include a military option. And one interesting thing about this alliance, this potential alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel is that, perhaps Saudi Arabia, I mean, this is this is a plausible scenario that they could use Saudi Arabian airspace to potentially, strike Iran right now. And so just a few weeks ago, actually just last month, the beginning of June, there was an unprecedented public meeting between a representative of Israel and a representative of Saudi Arabia. And they said at that meeting that there had been 5 private meetings prior to their public meeting. And so setting up this Israel-Saudi relationship is really unprecedented. Strange bedfellows in the Middle East, but these are very strange days.
Chris, explain to our viewers and listeners why Saudi would do this. Why would the Saudis do this? What's their fear and what's their interest?
Well, there's a huge schism between Islam, and that's represented by Shiite Iran, and that's the main country that follows Shiite Islam. And Saudi Arabia is sort of the main country that follows Sunni Islam. And you have to go back to the beginning of Islam to realize why the difference is. And what the difference is fairly simple, is that they disagreed back about 1,400 years ago after Muhammad the Prophet died. And the Shiites believed what should happen is that the successor to Muhammad should come from his family lineage. The Sunnis, on the other hand, believe that the successor to Muhammad should come from the Ummah, or the Islamic community. And ever since then, there's been that disagreement. It goes so far as to believe that the Shiites believe that the Sunnis are actually heretics. And so that's why both Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia are bitter rivals and enemies. And so so even though they both consider themselves Muslims, one side and the other consider each other heretics and the true followers of Muhammad. And that's why this is set up, this rivalry is set up right there in the Middle East.
I think we forget that, Chris, sometimes, that there's a civil war going amongst the Muslims themselves, and it's an interesting one, to say the least. So I guess if there is a Saudi-Israeli coalition, wow.
Oh, exactly. I mean, these are unusual days that we're setting up, and I think, Perry, we're going to see even more unusual things happening in the weeks, months to come. It almost feels like, put your seatbelts on, and we're going to see what happens here.
How are things up in Kurdistan?
Well, that's a great question, because right now the Kurds in Kurdistan, they seem to be making some headway against ISIS, the Syrian Kurds, that is. The Iraqi Kurds are holding the line against this. And you mentioned the book that I've written, Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. And right now, the Kurds are holding the line there. It's almost 600 miles long against ISIS. And right now, Iran's been taking the headlines for the last couple of days, obviously. But one of the other major battles going on is ISIS. And they have actually, in the last year or so, since we were up there, consolidated a lot of their power in Syria and Iraq. They control land about the size of England, and they're enforcing what's such a barbaric form, this medieval form of Islam that is killing children, killing women, putting women into slavery, and ravaging every ethnic group that they can find, whether they're Christians, Yazidis, or others. It's really an awful tragedy going on right there in the Middle East.
All right, before I take a break here, Chris, where can people get your book?
Well, they can get the book at DestinationJerusalemBook.com and also Amazon.com. And just briefly, I wrote the book to help people understand who ISIS is, why, what's happening to Christians in the Middle East, and how they can prepare for the days ahead.
All right, let me take a quick break here. We come back. I want you to kind of give us a little bit of a Jerusalem update. Any missiles still coming across the fence? All right, let me be right back with Chris Mitchell in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Okay, we're back, and our special guest today is Chris Mitchell. Of course, you see him here on the Dove Television Network. He is the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News in Jerusalem. In fact, we're Skyping him in there from the CBN News headquarters there in Jerusalem. He heads up Jerusalem Dateline, a program you see on the Dove TV. He's the author of his new book called Destination Jerusalem, ISIS Convert or Die, Christian Persecution and Preparing for the Days Ahead. And let me encourage you to get a copy of that book. And one other little quick thing here, Chris, you have blogs that are there at the cbn.com, is that right?
We have what, Perry?
Blogs, your blog?
Oh, yes, we have a blog as well. It's called Jerusalem Dateline as well. Twitter at Chris, CBN News. And so we get out there on Facebook as well.
Okay, great. Well, give us an update, Chris. What's happening in Israel? It's been a little quiet. At least we haven't heard much over here in the West. Are they still dodging missiles over there?
Well, there have been a few missiles coming out of the Gaza Strip in the last couple of months, but there have been just a few. Unlike last year about this time, there was a 50-day war between Hamas and Israel. So I think right now it's fairly quiet. Hamas was really devastated during that war, and they lost most of their missile arsenal. So, but so far it's been quiet. I doubt there be any disturbances like there were about a year ago on the southern border. On the northern border, Hezbollah has about 100,000 rockets possibly aimed at Israel. Right now, Hezbollah has been fairly occupied right now with their battle ongoing in Syria, trying to prop up the Syrian regime of Bashar Assad. The main thing right now, I think, is Iran's nuclear program, and I think that's dominating the attention here in Israel, among the political leaders, among the military staff as well. I think that's the number one threat that they have said for years, and now with this deal, it just exacerbates exponentially the threat they feel from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Has that united the Knesset? I mean, are they more with Netanyahu these days than against him?
It really has, and I think across the political spectrum, from left to right, they find unanimity about this threat. In fact, Itzhak Herzog, which is the opposition leader to the government right now, he met with Netanyahu last night, and I think, as he said on a BBC interview yesterday, there's really no daylight between him and Netanyahu about the Iranian threat, and I think they all feel, the leadership as well as Israelis, that Iran is Israel's number one threat, and they're going to be united about that.
So, Chris, if the Saudis and Israel, they come together with the coalition and they're able to get the airspace cleared in case Israel wants to go in, they have to fly over them to get in there. Let's hypothetically say they go in and make a strike to take out some nuclear installations. They have to worry about the other borders at the same time. I mean, it's not just one strike. I mean, their guard has to be up all the way around the real estate.
Oh, it does, and that's why I mentioned Hezbollah on the northern border. So if Israel decides that they need to have a military strike against Iran, Hezbollah, which is their proxy in Lebanon, they could start firing some of those 100,000 rockets against Israel. And so they could be facing a multi-front war if they really feel like they need to take a military decision. The other thing this does, Perry, it really pits Israel against the United States and much of the world powers. They're a bit isolated now because of this deal. You have all 5 permanent members of the United Nations signing off on this deal, including, in addition to Germany. And so if Israel ever does feel like they, for its own survival, strike against Iran, it really puts them fairly isolated against the rest of the world. We do have this unusual alliance, perhaps, between some of these Sunni nations, but the rest of the world might come against Israel.
What's the average Israeli feeling these days? Are they nervous? Are they tense? Do they get it?
Oh, they certainly get it, and they certainly take Iran seriously when they say death to America and death to Israel. And I think they see that they believe that what Iran says, they believe what Iran says when they say that Israel is the little Satan, but they also say that America is the great Satan. They certainly get it. I've been here almost 15 years, Perry, and I've seen that the Israeli people are quite resilient, and they've gone through Intifada, they've gone through a Second Lebanon War in 2006, 4 campaigns down with Hamas on the Gaza border. They're quite resilient, and I think they look at the long view. And many people do believe in the God of Israel, and so they feel like God will protect them.
Wow. So, am I hearing you say that the only potential, and it would be somewhat at arm's length, ally that Israel has at the moment is Saudi Arabia?
Well, it seems like they're the closest neighbor that shares a common enemy with Israel, and so there are other people. And in fact, Canada, I believe, just the other day said that they were going to take all the Iranian diplomats and send them home, and they were going to break relations with Iran. So that was an encouraging step. And I think, Perry, people also need to understand, people in the United States, that one thing that this deal didn't do was it did not deal with Iran's ballistic missile program. They have a robust missile program, and they have missiles right now that can easily reach Israel. So they don't need an intercontinental ballistic missile to reach Israel, but they can use an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, to reach the United States. And so when they say death to America, they mean that too. And so I think people in the United States need to realize that this is not just an Israeli issue. It's really an American issue as well. It's really a world issue because Iran has an idea. They want to not only have a hegemony here in the Middle East, they have global ambitions, and they really feel like they've been destined to take their brand of Islam, Shiite Islam, throughout the world.
It appears, Chris, that as we now see this deal as it unfolds, that the president may have done his biggest anti-Semitic move in his administration yet by keeping Israel out of the deal, making a deal that certainly doesn't even begin to include or respect or defend Israel. Does the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, does he understand that the faith community in America is with him? For the most part,
I think he does. I think they have seen, he and many of the Israeli political leaders have seen, a wellspring of support from the Christian community, groups like Christians United for Israel, ICEJ, International Christian Embassy for Jerusalem, CBN. I think they see that as a Dove TV, and the whole evangelical community in the United States. I think they very much see as supporters, and I think they distinguish between the Obama administration and what they have done, what actions they have done, and the Christian community in the United States. And I also feel like they see allies on Capitol Hill, a number of Republicans and Democrats as well, who see that they want to stand with the Jewish state. One other thing I'd like to add, Perry, is that, Israel in many ways feels isolated, and we seem to be coming up to days that I would describe with two authors. One, it said, Charles Dickens said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The prophet Isaiah said, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you, and deep darkness the peoples. With the rise of ISIS, with this deal with Iran, we see really darkness creeping over the whole earth. And yet there are bright spots. We talk about that in the book. There are more Muslims coming to faith in Jesus Christ now than at any time in the 1400-year history of Islam. And many of them are coming through supernatural dreams and visions. We've met a number of them, and we talk about some of those stories in the book. And so we see remarkable things. We see great light. We do see this great darkness, but we also see great light. And I think that's an encouraging thing in our time.
Thank you, Chris, for bringing that up. And I just want to encourage our viewers and listeners, check out his book. You need to get this because just that issue alone, you need to read about it. Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. So you've been able to document some of these. We've been hearing bits and pieces of it. Joel Rosenberg, yourself, others have mentioned that there has been literally miraculous intervention among Muslims. They're waking up after a dream, seeing Jesus as the Messiah, knowing immediately that it could cost them their life and execution, or certainly excommunication from their family. But it is happening, right?
It is happening, and one of the most exciting things I've had is to be able to meet a number of them. And I'll give you an example that we do talk about in the book. In a city in central Turkey, you go down a narrow alley and go up to a sort of a rundown apartment, and it's a home church for many Iranian believers who have fled Iran into Turkey to get asylum. And we interviewed a number of these people, and most everyone we talked to had come to faith through a dream or vision. And they have a vibrant faith. For example, we were watching a baptism. They took a large industrial plastic tub, they cut a hole in it, and they used that for their baptismal. And we watched several baptisms, and people just shouted and cheered and clapped, and they were just so excited. And so even though though they didn't have much of anything in the physical sense, they had a vibrant faith. And one other thing I'd like to add, Perry, is that, right now there's also heroic stories of faith under fire. And I can plug another book by a friend, Tom Doyle. He talks about killing Christians and about faith in the midst of where it's very hard to believe. He told us a story just a little while ago about 10 leaders in Damascus who had to make a decision. They prayed and fasted about whether or not they were going to stay in Damascus because it was getting so dangerous. They came back a week later after they all fasted and prayed. Instead of the 10, there were 25 who came, and they all decided to stay. And the one thing they did was they gathered money to buy a plot of land. And the plot of land, Perry, was to be their own cemetery so they could bury each other. And they decided that they would face death so that they could stay and be a witness for Jesus Christ. And that's the kind of heroic stories that are going on in the Middle East right now.
Whoa, what a story. These dreams and vision, Chris, is the central theme Jesus, the Messiah?
Oh, exactly. And they recognize that many times he identifies himself as Jesus. And often it's not necessarily they wake up and become a Christian, but they might see a satellite program. They might meet somebody in person. There's even been dreams where they would, people have been told to go to a market and they'll meet somebody and there'll just be this divine encounter with a fellow believer. And so that is happening over and over. In fact, Iran, despite this nuclear deal, is actually one of the fastest growing churches in the world right now. Obviously, it's underground, but these things are happening over and over. And I just think it builds our faith in the West to hear these kind of testimonies of how the Holy Spirit, Jesus himself, is appearing to Muslim people literally throughout the Islamic world.
Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Back to the Prime Minister just for a moment. We've got about 2 minutes left here. He was educated in the United States. He raised most of his money in Christian churches in the United States for his election. He understands Bible prophecy. Does he think does he think he's a part of it?
I think he certainly feels he's part of history. One thing we talk about in the book, in November of 2013, we had the opportunity to go with Netanyahu up to Moscow to visit Vladimir Putin. At the time, he wanted to convince Putin not to sign what was then an interim agreement with Iran. He failed in that, but we had the opportunity in a background briefing with all the other journalists on the trip to talk to Netanyahu. And I had this question to ask him, and I was able to ask him, did he feel sort of like Churchill was in the 1930s, when Churchill was a voice in the wilderness, railing against Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler? And he said he was. He felt like he was the similar voice talking about the dangers of a nuclear Iran. And I think he feels called in history, and perhaps he feels called by the Lord. He didn't say that exactly, but he did feel that he was responsible for the continuation of the Jewish people, and that he was called for such a time as this to stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb.
Wow. Well, Chris, thank you for what you do. And what time of day is it over there?
Right now it's about 7 o'clock, so it's not too bad.
Oh, okay, good. Thanks for what you do and putting your own self on the line like that. And all of you folks there at CBN, you do a wonderful job. This is an amazing time. And I guess now you're going to just watch and see how this thing unfolds. I don't know if we have enough at the moment to override a president veto. Yesterday, they said we may have. There are some Democrats in the House and the Senate said, no, we don't like this deal. Wouldn't it be interesting if the UN says yes and the American Congress says no?
It would be very interesting, and I think I actually hope the U.S. Congress does vote no, because I think they need to go on record in history that they would oppose this deal. And one last thing, Perry, I think we do live in interesting times, and in the book I talk about things that we can do to prepare for these days, and one of the first things is to watch and pray, so we could all do that right now. It's certainly a time to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem as well.
All right. Thank you, friend. God bless you. Thanks for your time. Again, the book, Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution and Preparing for the Days Ahead. Thanks, Chris. Look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you, Perry. Great to be with you.
All right. God bless you. All right. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. and you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us.